Today, we kick off the webinar series Lane in Europe, Europe in Lane, with our colleagues from the UK. These webinars will allow us to get to know our Lane members in Europe more in depth, learn about the collections related to Latin America and Iberia in their institutions, also learn about any distinctive Latin American collections in their country. Strengthen our connections with our Lane members in Europe, and related to this, explore ways of collaboration. My name is Jesus Alonso Regalado. I'm the librarian at the University of Albany and Lane Chair. Patricia Figueroa and Sarah Ponte will be managing our chat. This webinar will be recorded and available in our Lane YouTube channel, whose URL I will be sharing in the chat later. Let me briefly introduce our speakers today. Iris Bachman from British Library, Sonia Morcillo from Cambridge University, Julio Cazzasa from the Senate House Library at the University of London, and Joanne Ferrari and Frank Egerton from the University of Oxford. So let's get started with some introductory remarks about Latin American studies in the UK by Joanne Ferrari from the University of Oxford.
Thank you very much, Jesus. This will just be a very brief introduction to give a little bit of context to our presentations. But just to say that in the UK in the early 1960s, there was a real surge of interest in Latin American studies in the UK. And that partly came from a desire of the government to have greater knowledge about the region in order to develop better economic ties and cultural ties. So a government committee was formed, and that was headed by J.H. Parry, who was an academic historian of empire. And that committee was to make recommendations about the development of Latin American studies in the UK. And one of the major outcomes of that committee was the creation of 5 centres, which were known as the Parry Centres after Parry, who was heading the committee. And those were in Liverpool, Glasgow, Oxford, Cambridge, and London. So from 1964 onwards, that allowed a really tremendous growth in Latin American studies courses in universities. And along with this, there was abundant funding for library collections to support research and teaching on Latin America. So that's to give a bit of background about Latin American studies in the UK. And I will now pass on so the presentations can start.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation, Joanne. And now we are going to continue with Iris Bachman.
Yes. Hello, everyone. So I'm speaking to you here from St. Pancras, where the British Library is located. I just have put up the names of people. So I'm the curator for Latin American collections. Behind me is Nicole Rochelle Moore in my office with me today, who is looking after the Caribbean collections. And then there's Barry Taylor, who is curator of Romance collections, Spanish and Portuguese. And we also have Jeff West here, who is the former lead curator of the Hispanic collections at the British Library. So very good presentation. Next slide, please, Jesus. There's a slide missing, but then I just move straight on. I will add that slide just to say that Latin American and Iberian collections, and I will use the word Iberian throughout because I believe that outside Great Britain, Hispanic collections does rarely connotate Portuguese and Spanish, let alone Catalan, Basque, and so on. So I'll stick to Iberian. And Latin American and Iberian collections began with the library's foundation as the British Museum Library in 1753. And what you see here on this slide is our cataloging cabinet in the office that you see right behind me. And the curators at the British Library are responsible for acquisitions, conservation, description, interpretation, and research. And our posts, we are responsible for the collections post 1850. So earlier printed books, music, sounds, maps, and also manuscripts are under the curatorship of other curators, but we are often asked to contribute also with our linguistic and cultural expertise. I put up collection guides in the slides, which Jesus will share later on. Just be mindful, we are about to revise those. They do need a bit of love and care. Next slide, please. I won't say much about this. I said already, we have, as all at your libraries, also information about Latin America, the Caribbean and Iberia in different formats. But one thing which I find quite special also for my own research at the British Library is that we had an Italian keeper of printed books and later chief librarian in the 19th century called Antonio Panizzi, who had fled Italy for political reasons in 1823 because he wanted Italian unification. And he became quite instrumental in really turning the British Museum Library into a big research library, and he was very keen. He also managed to get the funds to do that. From that point on, the British Library has collected very widely books printed around the globe, really, which makes it quite not unique, but different from many other national libraries, because the British Library is the national library of the UK. Next slides, please. And so our collections on Latin America and the Caribbean really range from very early days of book printing in the Americas. You can see the Juan de Zumarraga, Archbishop of Mexico, one of the oldest books printed in the Americas. And that is North and South America, from the very top to the very south. And on the right-hand side, a beautiful map of Tenochtitlan, one of the oldest surviving plans of Mexico City from Spanish colonial times. Next slide, please. And then to more recent materials. So what you see here is a Cartonera book and a political pamphlet where Lilia Gonzalez, the Afro-Brazilian writer, political activist, and politician, was actually running for office for the PT, the Partido dos Trabalhadores. And the British Library has a small but quite substantial selection of those pamphlets. So really, you can find anything and everything at the British Library in terms of Latin America. One thing I would like to highlight is we have a lot of early printed books from Latin America, particularly Mexico, so 16th century. We have a lot of historical documents about European colonialism and slavery because of the British Empire and its involvement. And particularly, I think perhaps for scholars from the US, the presence of all the documentation of the India office, the British India office here, is quite interesting also for Latin America and the Caribbean because of the indentured labor from Asia there, and also current modern Asian diasporas from that region. So that's perhaps something you wouldn't get in the US. And then we also have sort of for more modern things, we have a number of archives as well, particularly of Caribbean, 20th century Caribbean authors, for example, Andrew Sulky, Beryl Gilroy, and Andrea Levy. So that, yeah, is another interest. Next slide. In terms of the Romance collections or the books and manuscripts on Iberian studies, Barry and Jeff are much more knowledgeable on that, and I've put the email addresses as well on the slides if you have more questions. But there's ample material as well, both contemporary and antiquarian, also manuscripts, and publications really of all dates in Spanish, Portuguese, Basque, Catalan, and Galician. I've put up collection guides again. I think one thing of note may be the Ashby collection of editions of Cervantes. Ashby collected those and donated them to the British Library, and they are apparently really very broad and outstanding. And we also have a very sizable collection of chapbooks in Spanish, Catalan, and Portuguese. And there is an online resource that perhaps Sonia will say more about, because it was a joint project with Cambridge University Library, and they host the website. And I have also given you a link of a wonderful blog by Jeff, which I came across as I prepared this, about why there are so many books in Euskera, in the Basque language, in the British Library. And I leave it for you to find out about that. Next slide. And this is just, again, to whet your appetite. This is from a current research project at the British Library about Indigenous languages in early printed books. We have a Chevening Fellow at the moment. That's a fellowship sponsored by the Foreign Office. And Isela Shospa is looking at these documents, which are mostly religious materials and grammars and vocabularies in the lenguas originarias. And Isela is looking particularly at how we can make these more accessible, particularly to modern speakers of these languages. Next slide. And then just, I won't say much about that, but I put up the link. This is from a past collaborative research project on Catonera publishing. And that's how I first met Sonia at the tail end of this project, together with Lucy Bell from the University of Surrey and Alex Flynn from the University of Durham. And the British Library holds around 350 Catonera books from 10 countries and around 30 Catonera collectives. And I believe together with our partner universities at Senate House and Cambridge, we come to a total of around 800-900 books in the London area. And the resources here are really very good. So check those out. Next slide. And then we also house the Endangered Archives project, which is an open access digitized material project. And the Endangered Archives program facilitates the digitization of archives around the world. So not just Latin America, that are in danger of destruction. If you know about any archives that need rescuing, then by all means refer researchers in the region or in the US to this program, because it's a really very good source. I put up a link from a recent project where the Barbados Gazette was digitized. And there was a crowd sourcing project that went with it. And they basically used the project to find out information about fugitives through fugitive slave ads. And they use this information to document agency and resistance of enslaved people. So obviously you can digitize material you can use in much more creative ways as well. Next slide. And then almost coming to the end, we have another great resource, I think, for the Americas collection here at the British Library, which is the Eccles Center for American Studies, which is really a springboard for developing ideas and advancing research. And they have been funded through a private donation, so they are the ones who have money to spend. It was founded by David and Mary Eccles, and the wonderful thing is that they award fellowships and awards to research the Americas collections at the British Library. So again, spread the word and bring many wonderful researchers to the British Library so that they can then work on our collections and make them more accessible to wider audiences. Next slide. And that's just a link to our blog, and also to say, so the bust you see is a bust of Andrés Bello, who needs no explanation in these circles, which I found when on my first day I had a look at the catalog and my new collections. And when I typed in Andrés Bello, this is what I found. And in this blog, I tell you a bit more about the backstage of the British Library at our collections. And just a final slide, and I say goodbye with that. Enjoy our collections. This is a book produced by our current Chevening Fellow, Isela Jospa, who is also in her real life an independent publisher in Mexico who publishes children's books in lenguas originarias. And Coneta Mali is one of her latest books, which also won a prize. That's all from me.
Thank you, Aris. And she's with us today, right?
She might be with us. I think Jeff passed on the link to her.
Yeah, I think she's here. So I mean,
okay, great.
Question for her, yeah, later.
Fantastic,
so
exactly. Fantastic.
So thank you. Okay, so now our next presenter is going to be Sonia Morcillo from Cambridge University.
Hello, good morning, afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. My name is Sonia Morcillo. I'm the Hispanic specialist at Cambridge University Library, and I'd just like to give you a snapshot of our main collections here at Cambridge. Next slide, please. So Cambridge University Library dates back to the 15th century, and it moved to its current location in 1934 to the building that you see here. It has over 8 million books and is one of 6 legal deposit libraries in the UK. As far as the Latin American and Iberian collections are concerned, they exist to support the curriculum of the university in the humanities and the social sciences. It's estimated at 174,000 items in Spanish, Portuguese, and the peninsular languages, but we obviously buy material in English as well, and to a lesser extent in French. We purchase and collect from all over Latin America, but with a special emphasis on Mexico, Colombia, Cuba, Argentina, and Brazil, and then also Spain and Portugal. And we actively collect on a range of subjects, as you see here, but we're particularly strong on history, literature, art history, and the visual arts. Next slide, please. So the library has rich holdings on Spanish chapbooks. We have over 2,000 pliegos sueltos and 197 allelujas. These are mainly poems, ballads, religious tracts, and relaciones de sucesos, and many of them deal with wrongdoing. Between 2011 and 2014, we had this project, the Wrongdoing in Spain project, which in combination with the British Library saw 4,500 Spanish chapbooks catalogued and digitized. Just under 2,000 were from Cambridge. I've provided the link here in case you want to have a look. And I also wanted to tell you about the Comedias Sueltas. We have a large collection of them, mainly integrated within a bigger collection of rare books in Spanish, almost 1,200 different editions. And in addition to this, in 2013, we bought a collection which is at the moment hidden because it's only partly catalogued, and but we're still working on it. And it's important because it's mostly plays, Spanish plays, dating from the 19th century. It contains quite a lot of Spanish Golden Age plays, adaptations, and the major playwrights of the 19th and the 18th centuries are well represented. There is also quite a lot of minor dramatists within the collection, which makes us think that they could be very rare. Next slide, please. We have a collection of cartoneras, and 250 in total, more or less, from a range of countries in Latin America. And the focus is basically Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. And we started collecting them shortly after the crisis hit Argentina in 2001. We just contacted our suppliers and got a representative number of them. But then in 2017, we became partners in kind in the Cartonera Publishing Project with the British Library and the Senate House Library. So the aim was basically join forces to expand our collections and create a UK national collection for research. We have established joint standards for bibliographic metadata with additional subject headings in Spanish and Portuguese, extended descriptive notes, etc. We are still working on this. And at Cambridge, the conservation work has been completed, but we're still cataloging many of them. So again, semi-hidden collection. Next slide, please. Also worth noting are the Caribbean collections of the Royal Commonwealth Society, which has rich holdings in the library on the Commonwealth and Britain's former colonial territories. The society was founded in 1868 and it came to the library in 1993. So we have important holdings on the West Indies and British Guiana, and it includes a variety of documents, as you see here, but most importantly, you may be able to see some of the photograph albums in the Cambridge Digital Library with the keyword Caribbean. You might be able to access them. There's not many, but at least it's something. Next slide, please. We also have a collection of Max Haupt's family correspondence and a book of visits. And these were donated by the family of Maria Luisa Haupt, one of his daughters. They lived in Cambridge for many years. And the archive contains 4 boxes of her letters from her family, written between 1916 and 1972. And they're mostly written by his daughters, but there are some written by Max or his wife. And although Max is not the main focus of the letters, we think that they are important because they chart the life of a family of intellectuals who lived miles apart in Mexico, England, and Spain at the time. The highlight of the collection is a visitor book, which is dated 1930 to 1950, and it contains poems and text, graphic illustrations by visitors to the residence of Max Haupt, of the Haupt family, in Mexico City. And well, together with poems, drawings, and dedications from Max Haupt himself, also from important intellectuals, writers like Damaso Alonso, Alfonso Reyes, and artists like David Alfaro Siqueiros. Next slide, please. I also wanted to draw the attention to the archive of Robert Guerat. He was one of the most prominent Spanish composers of the 20th century, born in Catalonia. He lived in Spain, Germany, and France in the 1920s and 30s, and he studied in Barcelona with Enrique Granados. He was a pupil of Arnold Schoenberg, who was a very prominent Austrian-American composer. And well, when Franco took over Barcelona in 1938, he was living in Paris, and he decided to move to Cambridge. He had contacts here in Cambridge, and for the rest of his life, he stayed here doing research, and basically after his death, the library was presented with his archive in 2008. Which contains most of his musical manuscripts, over 1,000 letters, many from Schoenberg, and programs, his collection of books and printed music, etc. I've provided a link as well so that you can have a look and if you are interested. Next slide, please. So my last two slides is basically to tell you about two projects that we are currently involved with here at Cambridge. The Mapping Pliegos project started in 2014 as a digital humanities project. Our aim was to create a union catalogue of Spanish chapbooks from Spain, held in major collections in Spain or abroad. So it started as a spin-off of the Wrongdoing project with an initial corpus of 5,000 Spanish chapbooks from Cambridge, British Library, and then the Biblioteca Tomás Navarro Tomás from the CSIC. And it's a collaborative project involving researchers, librarians, institutions, or private individuals with collections of digitized Spanish chapbooks. We are ready. I mean, the portal provides direct links to digitized collections of Spanish in several Spanish libraries, as you see here. And we are now about to launch the second version of the portal. The first one was launched in 2020. And this one will see the number of chapbooks represented move from 7,000 to about 9,000, and we will be including new collections such as the Fondo Hazañas from Sevilla, El Fondo from the Biblioteca Nacional, Fundación Joaquín Díaz, and perhaps one more, we're not sure yet. We have metadata experts working on the bibliographic records received by participant institutions. We luckily got funding for this, and this person is not only matching the records received from other institutions to our bibliographic standards set for the project, but she's also adding the links to the digitized images. She will be with us for another year, which is really excellent news. And as work progresses on the metadata, we're hoping to gradually feature more participating institutions. So this is a call to you all. If you have collections of chapbooks and you would like to participate in the project, please get in touch. We'll love to hear from you. And next slide, please. It's about a project that we are currently working on, starting in September 2021. We'll finish in September 2022. And it's again based on the Wrongdoing project. And we're aiming to come up with more accurate dates for about 67% of chapbooks from the project that didn't have a date of publication because there wasn't an imprint. In many cases, we had to base it on the name of the printer if we were lucky enough to have it. So to do this, we are aiming to conduct visual search on woodcut illustrations within the chapbooks and compare prints made from the same woodblocks. During the first phase of the project, we isolated individual woodblock prints by running images of the chapbooks through a machine learning model created by Oxford University's Visual Geometry Group. And I've provided the link in case you were interested. And we are now in the second phase of the project, where all the images alongside the metadata from the Cambridge Digital Library has been imported into an instance of the group's search engine. And our job now, starting in a couple of weeks' time, is to establish more accurate dates for these undated pliegos by basically putting dated and undated pliegos together with matching woodblock prints and comparing the images to see whether they could come from the same printer or the same period, and therefore narrowing down the date of publication for these chapbooks. And it is our hope that our findings will assist in research of a social or economic nature relating, for example, to the activity of printers, so that we can pinpoint exactly or with more accuracy when they were active and where, and also research of a cultural nature relating to fields such as stereotypes or fashion, gender norms, etc. And next slide, please, is my last one, just with my email address in case you want to get in touch. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Sonia. Okay, and our next presenter is going to be Julio. So let me, sorry.
Thank you, Jesus, and thank you for the invitation. I am Julio Cazzasa, Collections Development Coordinator of the Sena House Library, and I am in charge in this moment at the Latin American collection. The library holds an extensive and unique collection of printed and archived sources of Latin American and the Caribbean. From its inception, the collection was envisaged as a national resource, as Joanne described at the start in the Paris report. The collection has, next please. Next slide, please. The collection has been developed in close collaboration with the Center of Latin American and Caribbean Studies, part of the School of Advanced Studies of the University of London, the previous institutes, and a wide range of scholars and academics. It aims to record the history of the region, in particular the second half of the 20th century to the present, with a specific strength in politics, sociology, gender studies, economics, environment issues, indigenism, etc. The depth of the collection is increased with periodicals, political pamphlets, and documentary and feature films, plus others like the Cuchisaca Trust Archive or the Central American Photographic Collection. The collection's printed and archived material is complemented by e-resources, including e-books and databases. The film collection consists, next please. The film collection consists of a wide range of features, films, and documentaries. Of course, most of the material can be streamed today, but because not all some formats like the VHS are obsolete, we are able yet to offer to our readers and all the films and documentaries which haven't been updated in the format. The dissertations from former students are kept in the library stores, and the number of personal library collections given to the library are a permanent issue. They could be archives or books or a mix of both on a variety of subjects. To be accepted, we need to go to a process where is first an appraisal and after that a committee approval. I need to add some institutional archives like the one from the British Uruguayan Society, which is already over, which arrived during the lockdown, is now waiting for cataloging. Next, please. The collection is complemented by an excellent range of databases. This provides significant and rich digitized material for academic research. E-journals are not only replacing the printed versions, they are becoming the new normal, and the e-books are now a common find in our catalog. We use for this something which is called DDA with our suppliers, which is demand-driven acquisition. Next, please. Here we have some examples of databases. The number are increasing regularly from now a total of around 500. We keep subject orientated for Latin America 24. Some are more general, like Gestor, and others are more specific, like Senti Pensares Fem, about sharing ideas, praxis on feminism, philosophy, literature, etc. Next, please. The collection is supplemented with a wide range of subjects which are represented in the Latin American studies. As an example, in the Caribbean Basin is a common research ground shared with the Commonwealth Studies, which also have an institute in the School of Advanced Studies. The Spanish and Portuguese collections, modern collections, are mainly about literature and related to the Institute of Modern Language Research in the university. Next, please. Additional research material is available in the library's special collections and comprise printed books, archives, and ephemera. Next, please. Here you have some of the collections related, but we also could add others, like Ron Heisler collection of left-wing literature from around the world in both sequences, pamphlet and book. And from a more wider Iberian point of view, we have two collections. First, the Chile collection, approximately 2,500 items of Catalan interest, dating from the mid-19th century to the late 20th century. And the particular strengths are Catalan and literature and literary criticism, and social, political, and economic history of the region. As a comment, Joanne, the former owner, helped to develop Catalan studies between British Hispanism and was a leading member of the Anglo-Catalan Society. The other one is the one from Elliot Phillips, approximately 3,500 items printed in or relating to Spain between the early 16th and the early 20th centuries, with well over half of the printed material from before 1830s. Several items represent notable Spanish presses. A large part of the collection relates to the social history of Madrid, including an extensive set of manuales and guías de forasteros of the 18th century. The collection is particularly noteworthy for its evidence of the range of printed books available in Spain in the 16th and 17th centuries, from treatises on accounting, astronomy, handwriting, and cookery, to books of chivalric romances and love, poetry, dictionaries of the Castilian language, and collections of emblems, riddles, and humorous anecdotes. Official documents, maps, and manuscripts, and prints supplement the books. Next, I would like to bring to your attention two other collections. In particular, the first one is the Latin American Political Pamphlet Collection. This collection was originally owned by the Institute of the Contemporary Archive on Latin America. Originally consisted of 90 boxes. Today there are 140 and around 4,000 items, all them cataloged at 2-item level. This collection of Latin American political ephemera have an impressive variety and depth, and they hold a great deal of material which is either difficult or quite impossible to obtain elsewhere. The materials are mainly pamphlets, posters, reports, miscellaneous journals, and any other ephemera produced by political parties, guerrilla groups, pressure groups, NGOs, trade unions, and government. They are predominantly in Spanish and Portuguese, plus English and other languages. Every country in the region is represented, but some of them, like Chile or Guatemala, have more items than others. Next, please. The collection is part of the left-wing literature hub held in special collections, and is complemented with a modern Latin American collection I already mentioned at the start, as well with other archive material. Just a couple of examples. Next, please. The first one is about the new Chilean government in 1973 under Augusto Pinochet's leadership. It shows how it was planning to begin a national reconstruction of the country and the intentions of the military government. Next, please. The second one is an example of a pamphlet referred to the resistance to the military government after the coup of 1973, was published in Milano, probably in 1974, and is in Italian language, and shows how the international repercussions of this event in Chile. Next, please. The second collection I wanted to mention, and is already mentioned by my colleagues in British Library and Cambridge, is about the Cartonera publishers. I will not talk about the project and the origin of this collection because it's shared with British Library and Cambridge. But despite it's not a big collection, doesn't mean it's not important for us. I am sure most of you are familiar with the subject. Our Cartoneras publisher collection comprises over 250 books from Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Mexico, Peru, and Paraguay. And as the ones who are familiar knows, are made of recycled cardboard, cartón in Spanish, paper, and other discarded materials. Books are handmade with a variety of binding styles, and their covers are individually hand-painted, which makes each item unique. Printing runs consist of a small number of copies. The book, Sena House Libraries, are in Spanish, Portuguese, German, and Portuñol, a mixture of Spanish and Portuguese spoken in some parts of Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil, and Nahuatl, one of the Mexico's indigenous languages. The most common genres include poetry, short stories, narrative essays, and comics. They address a wide range of topics, including human rights issues, countercultural literature, social and political resistance, women's rights, LGBTQ+ issues, indigenous rights, and the rights of marginalized communities. Next, please. Just one example from our last exhibition for the Association of Hispanics of Great Britain and Ireland Conference. It is from Paraguay and used the Portuñol as a language. They proudly say this language lacks of rules, grammar, or any kind of order, and challenge the idea of country borders and also language borders. Next, please. Finally, some links to our website where you could find our online catalog and a couple more which could help in another request. So far, this is a brief description of our collections. As happens in most of the university libraries, this is evolving, and new additions and new developments and improving and changing some aspects. Some subjects like feminism and LGBTQ+ rights are developed as a whole in our team in model collections, and with my colleagues try to maintain up to date the collections in support to the research developed in the university. Thank you for your time and attention.
Muchísimas gracias, Julio. And last but not least, we're going to have our colleagues from University of Oxford, Joanne Ferrari and Frank Egerton.
Okay, so welcome to the presentation from the University of Oxford and Bodleian Libraries. I'm Frank Egerton, librarian at the Bodleian Latin American Center Library and subject consultant for Latin American history and social sciences. I'll be co-presenting with Joanne Ferrari, who is librarian in charge at the Taylor Institution Library and subject librarian for Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin American languages and literatures. So next slide, please. Okay, so because of the complexity of Oxford's university and collegiate system, library collections in Latin American studies are held in a variety of different locations, in addition to those at the Latin American Center and the Taylor Institution libraries. At least 9 other Bodleian libraries have Latin American holdings. For example, the Bodleian Law Library, the Social Sciences Library, which includes collections on the geography and the environment of Latin America, and the Bodleian Library itself. Links to the websites of Bodleian libraries with Latin American holdings can be found on our online guides, including that for Latin American history. Links to online guides and other resources referred to in this presentation will be included in the notes that accompany these slides when they are circulated after the event. Special collections are held at the Western Library in Broad Street, formerly the New Bodleian. Then there are the colleges, all 39 of them, which are run as independent institutions while also forming the core of the university's structure. Many colleges have collections in Latin American studies, including some with rare or antiquarian items. I should say at this point that most of what we will be talking about in this presentation is contained in physical collections. There is sadly to date relatively little online, although I will give further details of what there is later in the talk. Next slide, please. So the Latin American Center, this is based at the Postgraduate College St. Anthony's and was founded in the mid-1960s in response to the Parry Report, which Joanne covered in her introduction. It was intended as a center of excellence for the study of Latin America, initially offered broad courses in Latin American studies, which included history, literature and politics, as well as cultural studies, including music and cuisine. The Latin American Center's library was founded 57 years ago. At first, it was little more than a couple of shelves of books purchased by the long-standing fellow librarian and Latin Americanist, Malcolm Dease. Over the years, its collections grew and it was staffed by 2 librarians. In 2004, it was transferred to the Bodleian Libraries Humanities subject area in order to benefit from the economies of scale and extra funding provision afforded by the Bodleian Group of Libraries. It remains, however, within the Latin American Center building. In 2009, the library became part of the social sciences subject area, which reflected a shift in the emphasis of the courses offered by the center. Currently, the library supports 2 master's programs, the MSc and MPhil in Latin American Studies. Academic colleagues also supervise doctoral students, but these degrees are not offered by the center itself, but by the relevant faculty. The library's collection extends to some 18,000 volumes, social sciences and history, extensive runs of print journals, some special collections, for example, the Bevan collection, the Rosemary Thorpe papers and the Alan Angel papers. There are DVDs, a collection of microfilms and 200 boxes of grey literature. The Bevan collection comprises maps, essays, notes, and other miscellaneous material compiled by the linguist Bernard Bevan during his travels in Mexico in the early 20th century. The collection offers a valuable snapshot of Mexico and its indigenous peoples. The Rosemary Thorpe and Alan Angel papers are recent donations from emeritus fellows of the Centre and are currently being accessioned. A hand list of the former has been prepared. So I'll now hand over to Joanne, who will talk about the next slide.
Thanks, Frank. If I could have the next. Thank you, Jesus. So I'm going to talk about the Taylor Institution Library. And this was founded in 1845 by a bequest from Sir Robert Taylor, who was a successful London architect, also surveyor to the Bank of England, architect of the King's Works, and Sheriff of London. And you can possibly see in the picture on the slide, he's in a lovely portrait above our fireplace in our main reading room. And we will include a link in the notes to a blog post that gives more information about the history of the library. But the library opened in 1849, and the original aim was to teach those languages essential to diplomatic or commercial pursuits and considered to have a sufficient literature, which originally was considered to be French and German, but later Italian, Spanish, Slavonic languages, Byzantine and modern Greek and Portuguese were added, and then briefly in the late 19th century, also the teaching of Scandinavian languages. In the first decades of the foundation of the Taylor Institution, the teaching was quite an elementary level, and it wasn't until 1903 that a proper higher level school of modern languages was established. The purpose of the library has always been to provide a working collection to support the study of languages, rather than to be a rare books collection, although we do have rare books, often from donations from early donors. The focus of collecting in the 20th and 21st centuries has been increasingly restricted to core subject matter to support teaching and research in the Faculty of Modern Languages at Oxford. So we do cover languages and literatures of continental Europe and countries outside of Europe where those languages are spoken. So, of course, Latin America, but also Francophone and Lusophone Africa, and also including Celtic languages. So, next slide, please. So, as mentioned in the introduction, from 1964, following the Parry Report, the library began to build up substantial Latin American collections, and particularly during the 1970s and 80s, the Iberian and Latin American collections across Oxford were able to thrive due to very favourable financial conditions. In the Taylorian, the Latin American collection has been developed systematically since 1965, and historically has strengths in literature from Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, and Cuba. Indigenous languages are not covered by the Taylor, although there is some material in translation, for example, of Nahuatl poetry and theatre, and linguistic and reference material on Quechua, Tupi, and Guarani. Currently, we purchase around 600 volumes a year on Iberian and Latin American language and literature, and we also collect actively in Catalan and Galician, which are both taught at Oxford, as well as obviously Castilian, Spanish, and Portuguese, and we do collect occasionally in other European languages as well as English. We have a small historical collection of Basque materials, and if you go on to read the blog post that Iris mentioned from Jeff West at the British Library, then it does mention some of the Oxford Basque collections. We have around 90 active print journal titles covering Spanish and Portuguese speaking countries worldwide, with a focus on literature and linguistics, and then further collections of non-current periodical titles. And then, of course, we also have electronic journal collections as well, and those tend to be administered more centrally within the libraries. So we focus on key authors and countries which are more frequently studied, such as Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, as well as supporting the research interests of our faculty and graduate students. So just to give a few examples of recent theses from postgraduates in our faculty. So Recent works have included studies of authorship in Mozambique, Spanish theatre of the Golden Age, the neoliberal Latin American novel, rediscovering Ruendario through translation, and also some work on radio dramas that were made for the BBC Latin American service during the Second World War. And we also have many students who are working sort of in a comparative or interdisciplinary way. So one recent work on Cervantes' contribution to the development of the Russian novel tradition, also comparing 21st century French and Spanish writing, and the influence of Brazilian concrete poetry on Chilean neo-avant-garde. We do occasionally make more unusual purchases, so the most recent being a collection of Guatemalan book objects by an author, an artist called Manuel Choc, who other Salam members may have also purchased works from. Unfortunately, there was one item in the collection, we bought his whole collection, and there was one that DHL refused to ship because it was in the form of a jar filled with little tiny capsules, and even though the capsules were filled with little pieces of rolled up poetry written down, they still wouldn't carry it. So it wasn't anything illicit, but it probably looked rather suspicious. So unfortunately we couldn't get that one, but we did receive many other interesting items in that collection. Next slide, please. So moving on to some of our special collections, starting with the earliest one, the Martin collection. In 1895, we were left around 1,000 volumes of early Spanish and Portuguese works, and they were bequeathed by a Miss Wilhelmina Mary Martin, and that includes early editions of Cervantes, Calderon, and Lope de Vega, as well as other works on religious and historical topics. And Wilhelmina Martin holds a special place in the history of the tailor because she is our only major female benefactor of the 19th century. So we did have other generous benefactors of that time, but she's the only female one. And the small sketch that you can see on the slide of a person praying, that was found in one of her books. We're not sure if that's a sketch that she made herself or somebody gave that to her, but sadly we don't have any pictures of her, which is a shame because we do have busts and portraits of some of the male benefactors. But interestingly, her mother's diaries are held by the British Library, and from those we know that Wilhelmina was a keen book collector from a young age. And at some point when I retire, I might do a research project on her if I have the time, because I think she's an interesting figure. But moving on to the Butler Clark collection, Henry Butler Clark was a Taylorian teacher of Spanish from 1890 to 1894 and a fellow of St. John's College, Oxford. And we have on deposit from St. John's College his library of Latin, Arabic and Spanish early books. And there is a printed catalogue of that collection, but I think sadly not an online one, although the books are catalogued in the online catalogue as well. And then finally the Pring Mill bequest, and some of the more long-standing members of Salam may know of Robert Pring Mill, may have met Robert Pring Mill, who sadly passed away in 2005. And he was a university lecturer in Spanish at Oxford from 1952 onwards. And he donated a lot of material to the Taylor Institution Library throughout his life. And he also made a significant bequest of 1,500 volumes, which I will talk a little bit more about. Next slide, please. So there are three main areas of focus in the Pring Mill bequest. The first is Pablo Neruda, and one of the most treasured items in the bequest is a manuscript. So it's a hand-corrected draft manuscript of Los Libertadores from the Canto General. So that's one of our very kind of special Pablo Neruda items. And as well in the bequest, as well as the manuscript, there are numerous editions of works by Neruda, as well as translations, critical studies, vast numbers of scholarly articles that Robert Pring Mill collected in the course of his teaching and research. There's a lot of articles that are obviously being sent kind of back and forth between various scholars and him. Also sometimes things passed on to him by Pablo Neruda with notes to him in Neruda's famous green ink. There are scripts and notes for lectures that Pring Mill gave, conference papers that he gave about Neruda and poetry, as well as correspondence, newspaper cuttings and exhibition catalogues. The second main area of focus is Nicaragua. And although much of the collection focuses on literary works, there's also a strong social and historical aspect to the material. So there are books and political pamphlets on the Nicaraguan Revolution covering the Sandinista movement, the role of women in social change, as well as representations of conflict in Latin America in literature. And there's also general coverage of Latin American history and politics. And again, we'll send round a link to some really interesting blog posts that were written on the Nicaraguan section of this archive by a library intern a few years ago. And it has some nice photographs of the material, so I would definitely recommend having a look at those. And then last but not least, the third area of focus is committed or protest poetry from Spanish America. And there's about 1,500 volumes, say from across Spanish-speaking America, and a few titles from other countries, but good representation from Argentina, Chile, Cuba, and of course Nicaragua. So the bequest also includes background works and literary criticism that cover Dr. Pringmill's other areas of interest. So from Ramon Llull, Spanish Golden Age drama and poetry, there's even a small collection of sort of indigenous North American books as well. And as well as monographs, the collection comprises some audiovisual and ephemeral material. For example, cassette tapes of lectures that are given at Oxford, as well as commercially produced tapes of Latin American authors reading their own poetry. I just want to mention a couple of really interesting sort of subsections in the collection. So there are letters between Ernesto Cardenal and Robert Pringmill. There are notes from Robert's trip to visit Cardenal in Solentidam in Nicaragua in July-August 1972. And there's also the archive of Osvaldo Rodriguez Musso, who was a Chilean musician, poet, and essayist, and famous for his song Valparaíso. Unfortunately, none of the collection is digitized. The book collection is catalogued on the Oxford Library catalogue. A lot of the archival material is hand listed. I think it probably has some really interesting things for researchers in there. So anyone wishing to come and make a visit to dive into it is more than welcome. And I will pass back to Frank.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. Although it's quite hard to arrive at a definitive number for the Latin American holdings across the university, we think that a ballpark figure of 100,000 items is reasonable, or titles is reasonable. Many of these will be held by the Bodleian Library and will be housed at its off-site book storage facility at Swindon, some 40 miles from Oxford, which has the location closed stack on the university online catalogue, Solo. These items can be requested to the larger sites for consultation, the Bodleian Library, Social Science Library, Taylor Institution Library, etc., but not to smaller sites, including LAC currently. Although the book storage facility is located at quite a distance from Oxford, the turnaround time for orders is the next day, and the service has proved very efficient. So, next slide, please. Special collections hold headline items such as the Codex Mendoza, as well as historic monographs and archived material with, I would suggest, an emphasis on the UK or European perspective. For example, 18th and 19th century monographs on the subjects of exploration, travel, and natural history. A valuable source of information on some of these monographs is the Bodleian publication Europeans in Latin America, Humboldt to Hudson, catalogue of an exhibition held in the Bodleian Library, December 1980 to April 1981, prepared by R.A. McNeill and M.D. Deese. Malcolm Deese, I've already mentioned, as being a fellow at the Centre. R.A. McNeill is Robert McNeill, who joined the Bodleian Library as an Hispanic cataloguer before becoming Hispanic and Latin American subject specialist. He was president of SALAM from 1994 to 95. Archive material can be found in resources such as the Conservative Party and Oxfam archives. There is a brand new online special collections Bodleian Archives and Manuscripts catalogue, which was launched this academic year, and a link shown on the slide will be included in the notes to it when they are circulated. In characterizing the emphasis of a collection, as I've just done, one risks giving the impression that it's far narrower than it really is. Students looking for early Latin American printed books and archival material may well gain a different perception. It depends what the researcher is looking for. The key thing is that much work can be done before arriving in Oxford using the online catalogue, which is a terrific bibliographic resource and which reveals the richness of the holdings. A proportion of special collections material is held at the Western Library. However, much of it is also located at the book storage facility. It can be called in and consulted only at the Western Library. Visiting academics can apply to access special collections, and a link to the relevant site will be included in the slide notes. So next slide, please. Access to college libraries is by arrangement with the appropriate librarian. Colleges hold titles in Latin American studies which are catalogued on solo, though I think it is fair to say that not all the material housed in college collections has been added to the online catalogue thus far. Colleges also hold special collections material. For example, Regent's Park College houses the David Nichols Memorial Collection on Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and other Caribbean territories. The collection covers a variety of subjects in the areas of politics, theology, Caribbean studies, and material on specific Caribbean countries, including Haiti, Jamaica, Trinidad, and the Dominican Republic. It is particularly strong on Haitian politics, society, and culture, areas that David Nichols explored in several important books. Next slide, please. The Bodleian Libraries has very extensive holdings in e-resources, e-journals, and e-books. These are available to members of the university and appear on the public online catalogue solo. Moving to Digital Bodleian, this website was first launched in 2015 with the aim of bringing together digitized content from the Bodleian Library's extraordinary and rich collections into a single portal. The Bodleian Libraries have been digitizing content since the early 1990s, and Digital Bodleian was and is designed to enable access to that content for the widest possible audience. It includes some digitized Latin American material, notably the Codex Mendoza, Codex Bodley, and Codex Selden. There are also extensive collections of digitized photographs on the Pitt Rivers Museum website. South America has been one of the museum's strongest areas of recent collecting activity. Early collections include prints by missionary Andrew Pride in the Gran Chaco circa 1900 and Charles Kroll in Peru, 1890. Recent acquisitions have included extensive and significant field archives, such as that of ethnobiologist Darrell Posey in Brazil in the 1980s, anthropologist Peter Riviere in Brazil and Suriname, 1960s and 70s, Brian Moser and Donald Taylor in Colombia in 1960 to 61, and Jonathan Ambash and Richard Somares Smith in the same country, 1965. Finally, I've included AURA, or the Oxford University Research Archive, which includes open access research outputs, such as articles on theses, including in the area of Latin American studies. It also houses data sets, but so far none that I can find have been deposited for Latin American studies. Yes, next slide, please. So finally, well, Oxford welcomes applications from students at international universities, consultation material on a reference-only basis. there's a link to the Bodleian Admissions website included with the slide notes. There are also Bodleian visiting fellowships, which fall under a scheme for scholars from outside Oxford wishing to use special collections material for visits of 1 month or more. Again, links to further details appear on the slide notes. So next slide, please. These are some links to our online guides. You have the link to the Latin American Studies Index, which Joanne and I prepared. So it actually enables you to link out to the other guides, Latin American history and so forth, and social sciences. And then the Spanish and Latin American language and literature, and the Portuguese and Brazilian language and literature guides, which Joanne has prepared. And finally, the last slide are contacts. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank. Okay, so right now we're going to talk about those collections in the UK that focus on Latin America and also Iberia, but that are not part of LANE. And we're going to start, Julio is going to start this conversation.
Well, the Essex collection of art from Latin America is part of the University of Essex. It is a teaching and research resource for the staff and students, and means for the university the possibility to exchange art, knowledge, and expertise globally. The collection is based at the University Colchester campus and has more than 750 artworks in a broad range of media dating largely from 1960s to the present. The collection has a purpose-designed teaching and research space and artworks on public displays in the ESCALA gallery in the Silverrat Student Center, as well as an online catalog documentation center of approximately 4,500 archival items, and the Albert Sloman Library, which holds the national collection of 10,000 Latin American art books. Together, these combined resources make the University of Essex one of the most complete resources for art and from Latin America in the UK. In this short presentation, I want to mention the three main themes in the collection: environment, human rights, and Indigenous America. Next, please. Environmental challenges are among the most urgent issues facing us today. Latin America is a long-standing site of contrasting worldviews about the environment and nature, which can be traced from indigenous ecologies and colonial encounters through to contemporary resource conflicts and the biodiversity loss. As a new area of interest in research, education, and collecting, the environment connects ESCALA to the work of academics from across the university, school, and faculties, enabling to global scope of environmental decline through the regional lens of art from Latin America. This collection theme was launched through undergraduate and postgraduate teaching in the School of Philosophy and Art History, and consolidate with exhibitions Come to Ground and Aggregate Flows held at Art Exchange in 2019. Work around this theme continued through acquisitions resulting from the postgraduate module, collecting art from Latin America, and ongoing research projects and interdisciplinary teaching. Next, please. Many of the artists in ESCALA engage directly and indirectly with the basic rights and freedoms to which all humans are entitled, as expressed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Alongside the collection, the Human Rights Centre at the University of Essex is one of the UK's leading centres in the subject for the interdisciplinary study of the theory and practice of human rights. Next, please. ESCALA has a particular interest in the theme of Indigenous America in its collecting and research, which has developed from the collection's inclusion of the rich diversity of artistic traditions in Latin America, including those of the region's present-day indigenous and pre-Hispanic peoples. ESCALA investigates these artistic traditions and contemporary artists whose practice engage with them, as reflected in the master model Collecting Art from Latin America, Indigenous and Post-Indigenous Art, offered by ESCALA and in the School of Philosophy and Art History. ESCALA research interests intersect with those of staff and students in other disciplines, including sociology, Human Rights Center, and the Essex Transitional Justice Network. Next, please. Plus, some links for those who will have some interest in communicate with the curators of the collections. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Julio.
Okay, so Canning House, I'll start with a brief history. For over 75 years, Canning House has been the United Kingdom's leading think tank on Latin America, with a mission to build understanding and relationships between the UK, Latin America, and Iberia. Canning House focuses on the region's political, economic, social, health, and environmental trends and issues, and their implications for business risks and opportunities. The organization publishes newsletters and in-depth reports and convenes geopolitical, socio-economic and business conferences and seminars to raise awareness and understanding, aid policymaking, and disseminate best practice, as well as offering networking opportunities. The Canning House Library was described by historian Hugh Thomas as one of the jewels of Latin American studies in the United Kingdom. Its collection, extending to some 54,000 titles, was transferred to King's College London in 2012. The breadth of subject coverage is extensive, from the physical sciences to law and geography, from folklore and anthropology to the social sciences, from contemporary art to sport and pastimes. It is particularly strong in the areas of history, international relations, and especially literature. Many of its holdings are hard to find in other library collections in the United Kingdom, and some are unique in the UK. To date, over 15,000 titles, including special collections items, have been catalogued and added to the King's College collections and are held in the Morn Library. Work is proceeding on cataloguing the remaining titles, and included in the notes for the slide is a link to the King's College online catalogue. The film collection, in addition to the Canning House print holdings, in 2012, the Canning House film collection, consisting of over 400 items, was donated to Senate House Library's Latin American and Caribbean Studies collection. And finally, visiting fellowships. In 2019, Canning House and King's College launched a new visiting fellowship with the aim of providing an opportunity for Latin American academics to enrich their research using the extensive Canning House library collection at King's. There are 2 visiting fellowships of 3 months each year. The fellowship includes the cost of flights to and from the UK and a monthly stipend of £2,500, and that's the figure for this year. Okay, and that's Canning House.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay, so The University of Liverpool is one of the leading centers for Hispanic studies in the UK, covering Latin American and Iberian studies, including Catalan, Galician, and Basque language and cultures. It has large holdings in Hispanic books and periodicals and holds the oldest chair of Spanish in the country, dating back to 1908. The university is home to major publications, including the Bulletin of Hispanic Studies, the Bulletin of Contemporary Hispanic Studies, and the series Hispanic Textual Research and Criticism. And the Sidney Jones Library houses the Latin American and Iberian collections and the Special Collections and Archives Department. In terms of the scope of the Latin American and Iberian collections, the library aims to collect books on Spain, Portugal, and Latin America, especially Peru, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, and the River Plate, and also Spanish Africa. And books are collected in Galician, Basque, Catalan, Portuguese, and Spanish. Next slide, please. Or do we? The library has extensive holdings on the Spanish Civil War with 5 distinct collections, as you see here. And so I'll give you a brief overview of their contents. The Edgar Alison Pierce collection. Alison Pierce, 1891-1952, was professor of Spanish at the University of Liverpool and founder of the Bulletin of Hispanic Studies. He collected about 300 contemporary books and pamphlets with press cuttings, lecture notes, and correspondence relating to Spain during the Civil War and its aftermath. The E.G. Burford Papers is another collection. He was born in London, 1905, and in July 1936, he traveled to Barcelona for the Olympics, and he got caught in the military uprising, which broke out on the 19th of July. So from there, he broadcast English translations of the news from the government's Radio Barcelona before he could go back to the UK. So the collection includes eyewitness accounts of the military uprising in Barcelona at this period, with 1 box of correspondence, photographs, radio broadcasts, etc. Next collection is the Ronald Fraser Oral History Tapes. Ronald Fraser was a leading historian on 20th century Spain, and the collection includes interviews with a family in hiding from Franco for 30 years after the end of the war. And the research materials, which consist of 6 boxes of 88 taped interviews and transcripts, were collected by Fraser for 2 of his books. Next is the Manuel Irujo collection. Manuel Irujo, 1891-1981, was a lawyer, a politician, an exponent of Basque culture from Navarra in Spain. The collection contains nearly 400 books and pamphlets and 117 periodicals relating to Basque language, literature and culture, the Basque country during and after the Civil War, Basque politics and nationalism, science and nature, and Latin America. Amongst these are Basque newspapers published for exiles in both Europe and the Americas, and many rare Basque language publications. And the last collection within the Civil War one is the Eleanor Rathbone Papers, and it includes records of the work of politicians on behalf of refugees from the war. And it consists of 5 files reflecting her parliamentary career during the Spanish Civil War as a member of the Joint Committee for Spanish Relief and as a honorary secretary for the Parliamentary Committee on Refugees. Another collection is the Latin American collection, which contains over 600 items on Latin America with a special emphasis on Peru and Brazil, but also including Mexico, Argentina, and the River Plate. And it also includes many travel accounts from the 16th century and later. The Peninsular War collection consists of more than 250 volumes relating to the Peninsular War, the Battle of Waterloo, and the training and discipline of the British Army in the early 19th century. But the bulk of the collection consists of memoirs, journals, and letters from men who served under the Duke of Wellington in Portugal, Spain, France, and Belgium. And finally, the Joseph Blanco White collection, José María Blanco y Crespo, 1775-1841, was an Anglo-Spanish theologian, priest, poet, journalist, and literary critic who fled Spain for Britain during the War of Independence. And between 1810 and 1814, he edited El Español, which was a monthly Spanish magazine in London that was strongly for the independence of Spanish America, and it is actually freely available online from the Biblioteca Digital, from the Spanish National Library. And the collection includes his correspondence, journals, manuscripts, and books, which were bequeathed to the university in 1894. And this is all from Liverpool. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Sonia.
So moving on to the Instituto Cervantes. This is the official language and cultural center of the Spanish government, and it's a non-profit organization founded by the government of Spain in 1991. The mission of the Institute is to promote Spanish language teaching throughout the world, as well as Spain's co-official languages, in addition to fostering knowledge of the cultures of Spanish-speaking countries. It offers a varied cultural program and also a range of Spanish language courses at all levels for non-native speakers, and these include specialist courses in some cases, so for example in business Spanish or translation. The library collection, so there's the Biblioteca Reina Sofía, so it was opened by the Queen of Spain, and the collections are following kind of in line with the brief of the Centre of Promoting Spanish Language and Culture in the UK. So there's a collection of over 30,000 items, and this includes reference works, language learning material, books for children and young people, as well as Peninsular Spanish and Spanish American literature. Works on history, art, film, philosophy, politics, economics, and sociology are also available. And the collection includes Spanish newspapers and magazines, as well as audiovisual material such as Spanish and Spanish American films, documentaries, TV series, animated series, music, and audiobooks. And registered members of the library can also access ebooks and other online resources such as newspapers. There is a very significant collection of travel books on Spain. So it's, I think, one of the most significant collections on the image of Spain in literature as seen by foreign travellers, and it covers more than 3 centuries of works on Spanish history, society and culture from the beginning of the 18th century to the present day, and it provides an extremely important resource for the study of Spain as seen through the eyes of travellers from diverse countries, including the UK, but also France, Germany, Italy and the United States. There is a Civil War pamphlets collection as well, so that comprises more than 250 pamphlets published during the Spanish Civil War, so from 1936 to 39, and relating to different positions taken during the conflict. The majority of the pamphlets are in favour of the Republic, although some are pro-Franco, pro-Catholic Church, with strong anti-communist stances. Most of the pamphlets are in English, but there are some in Spanish and a smaller number in other languages. And there's also a donation from Canning House. So obviously we've heard about Canning House already, but in 2012, the Institute received around 1,000 volumes from Canning House, covering a wide range of topics on Spain and Latin America. And in the notes, we'll link to a blog post that tells you a bit more about that collection. And as mentioned, there's a full programme of cultural events that's run by the centre. So lectures, film screenings, book launches, theatre and exhibitions. And for example, there's a book club which includes reading Latin American authors. So from last September onwards, they've been running a series on Spanish and Latin American post-boom authors. And over the pandemic, the book club was online, so it was kind of available for more people to join. And there's also a conversation club, which again, over the pandemic has been online with themed discussions for language learners. And that's all from the Cervantes.
Muchas gracias, Joanne.
And last but not least, we're heading north again to the University of Manchester and the John Rylands Research Institute and Library, And next slide, please. The John Rylands Library was founded in 1899 and initially was a public library and was later merged with the university library. And I put up this little story again because quite interestingly for us here who have an interest in Latin American collections, the person who founded the library, Enriqueta Rylands, was born in Matanzas, Cuba, and married to the cotton merchant John Rylands, after whom she named the library after he had died. And she was very much a book collector and had already started to collect books together with her husband before he died. One very important collection, for example, was the Earl of Spencer collection, which she acquired in 1892. And in recognition of this great gift she gave to the city of Manchester, she was the first woman to receive the freedom of the city of Manchester at the same time that the library was inaugurated. I put a link for a blog on Enriqueta Rylands because in her lifetime, she never mentioned her Cuban connections and her family in Cuba. She was of French-Scottish descent, quite common occurrence in the Caribbean at that time. It was, of course, the high time of sugar plantations in Cuba, and her family owned sugar I don't know if sugar plantations or a sugar plantation. And when she came, her parents died quite early, and then she came to Europe, and yeah, that was never anything mentioned. And this block looks a bit closer at that background of Enriqueta Rylands. She was also often referred to as Mrs. Ryland, so that you wouldn't, because the Enriqueta obviously gives away, yeah, something of a Hispanic origin. Next slide. So Manchester has, although it was not mentioned in the Perry report, the University of Manchester has a very strong department these days of Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin American studies, and hence the regular university library also has very good collections on Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin American books. The university also has a multidisciplinary Center of Latin American and Caribbean Studies, which is run together with social science and anthropology, and does a lot of research and also teaches undergraduate students. Manchester is, and the library are quite strong on Portuguese studies. It was one of the first chairs for Portuguese studies in the country. And then in addition to these normal wider university collections, the John Rylands Library has these special collections which were started by Enriqueta Rylands yeah, are very rich. Oh, we have the slides, yes. So in terms of Latin American studies, I would like to highlight indigenous languages and cultures manuscripts and archives relating to trade with South America. So there are two manuscripts in Spanish and Pano and Guarani, vocabularios, which were usually related to the missionary work, because the priests had to learn the languages in order to successfully or not successfully to convert the populations. And there are also 3 manuscripts in indigenous languages from Mexico, one of them an incomplete codex on amatl, the Mexican fig tree. And the other 3 archives I have mentioned here, the Owen Owens archive, Hodgson Robinson, and the Heald Hall family papers, are all related to commercial links with South America, specifically Argentina, from the 19th century. So the UK were very keen on Latin American independence because they wanted to do trade with Latin America, and Manchester, obviously a very commercially prosperous city in the 19th century on the back of the Industrial Revolution, had these links too. Next slide and final slide. So the special collections, as I mentioned, Enriqueta, Rylands was not very keen to collect anything particularly to do with her own heritage. So that the strengths of the collections are really medieval and early modern peninsular manuscripts, and archives relating to the Peninsular War, like at the University of Liverpool. So the Spencer collections are particularly rich in Latin manuscripts of medieval time, and one Hebrew manuscript, which was produced in Catalonia. Then there is a large number of Spanish manuscripts from 1600 onwards, and incunables from the 15th century. It's quite rich in Spanish and Portuguese history, generally speaking, and particularly 17th century Catalonia and the Basque Country are well represented in terms of historical documents, not digitized, I'm afraid. And then in terms of archives related to the Peninsular War, there are the Clinton papers, which are quite extensive, but as yet uncatalogued. So again, something for researchers, and a smaller collection, the Kennedy papers. And for anyone interested in the Spanish Civil War, Manchester also holds the Manchester Guardian archives, because the Guardian newspaper, which you may know from the digital edition today, was originally founded in Manchester. And there are also archives, the papers of Giovanni Pontiero, an early reader at the University of Manchester, and the translator of José Saramago, and links to all of these are in the notes as well. So that's it from Manchester.
Thank you, Iris. Well, here you can see the contact information for all our presenters today. Thank you so much for these great presentations, and thank you all of you, everyone that has attended this webinar.